I'm Dr. Andy Neely. I've been thinking about what makes a good leader for more than 25 years. We're going to be talking about balancing the tensions of leadership across the pond with my good friend, Sam Bishop, who is dialing in this morning from the UK. Sam, I'm so excited to be sharing this time with you.
Yeah, likewise, Andy. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's great to be with you. I'm looking forward to what we're going to be talking about in our time together today and in future conversations too. I can't wait to share it with my audience. I'm looking forward to hearing what all your audience think of it too. But yeah, really excited to start to discuss that balancing of those tensions in leadership across the pond and balancing out maybe some of the perspectives that I'm seeing over here and also learning more about what you're doing in your work over there too. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and looking forward to working with you.
Me too. So when you and I were talking about this, we agreed this whole area of balancing the tension of leadership in an employee-centric world where they seem to be in charge. What are you seeing in the UK and in the European marketplace?
Yeah, one of the things in preparation that I was really mindful of, Andy, coming into the time today was that tension between being individually employee focused. So that idea of really considering the strengths of the unique employee that you've got in front of you, and the balancing of that tension about them fitting into the team or fitting into the business, or how they find their position then with colleagues in that desire, which I often hear when I work with leaders around having a collaborative or cohesive team, but also alongside that, having these really fantastically high-skilled individuals that are brilliant at what they do. And so for me, I think that's probably a great place to start is how do leaders balance that tension between really thinking about unique individuals, but also then balancing that against the strength of the team or the cohesion together.
Yeah. And, a lot of the firms that I work with here in the States, a lot of the managers I work with had been team members and then were promoted to a team lead position. So that distinctiveness that you mentioned a minute ago that they bring to the table, sometimes the very thing that got them promoted can get in the way of them being an effective team leader, because the requirements of being a manager, and that I would say is growing themselves into a high-performing leader, looks different than somebody that's on the floor getting the work done. So one of the challenges I see is the ability to learn how you and I can help our management teams manage that tension of, yes, we want the uniqueness, but you can't let that uniqueness get in the way of overall team effectiveness. And, I think particularly in the time in the market that we're seeing here in the States, the focus is on worker fulfillment. And while I think that is an absolutely wonderful thing and probably a long overdue focus, at the end of the day, for a team leader to be able to find fulfillment, they need to be able to find fulfillment in such a way that they're financially viable next quarter and next quarter and next quarter and next quarter. And so in some respects, you need the conformity to the mission of the organization long term. It is not just about the employees being fulfilled. It's about the mission of the organization. And quite honestly, I think that impacts profitability. There's a tension that we're feeling here in the States right now. Privately held companies and marketplace, corporately held shareholder companies, how do they balance that tension of letting employees be who they are and still being responsible to their mission and to their future?
I think one of the encouraging things, Andy, is that you're seeing it over there, and I'm definitely seeing it over here too. But one of the things that still strikes me is how different leaders and different organizations are approaching that tension in a variety of different ways. So some I'm noticing are very strong and very passionate about promoting the individual employees' needs, fulfillment, using the language of what you've just said, and really trying to prioritize that with the belief or the mindset that if I can get them feeling fulfilled, then bought into their passion, their drive, their growth, their expertise being utilized, then that will ultimately lead to the fulfillment and benefit of the company in the longer term. But I'm also recognizing that there are leaders that adopt a different mindset, which I suppose would, using language that maybe we use over here in the UK, would be more, are the employees on the bus or are they off the bus? And
Yeah.
by that, I
Yeah.
mean, are you getting on the cause? Are you happy to jump into this direction of travel that we're
Right.
going on? And so, yes, we respect you as a unique individual, but we as an organization need to go in this direction. And that could be affected because the challenges in the market, could be because of things like the recession and all those sorts of dynamics going on. But ultimately, messages to the individual employees are, yes, we respect you and we would like you to feel fulfilled. But for the survival of the organization, the business right now, we need you to get in line. We need you to be aligned with us, get on the bus and travel in this direction. And so that's something that I'm seeing over here too, Andy. Definitely.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that here. There's a tension, and I'm on LinkedIn regularly, and you see that tension even on LinkedIn. You have some CEOs who are all about their team members. Gosh, a few months ago, Sam, the viral video on LinkedIn here in the States was the crying CEO who had just had to lay off some people and was devastated by that. And it was interesting to see the really, in some respects, the visceral response of other leaders recognizing that's the tension that we're talking about right now. And it's not just short-term survivability. If I'm at the head of an organization, if I'm at the head of a department, if I'm at the head of a division, I need to be winning at whatever game I'm playing. You and I've talked a little bit. I serve some NGOs here in the States, and while they're not a for-profit company, they still have a mission that they're required to fulfill. And so even the NGOs out there, you've heard me refer to it as the weird Uncle Harry syndrome, where if you've got this person that he may be a member of the family, and so he's allowed to show up for holidays and sit in the corner and be odd, but your business is not a family. It's a performing business, whether it's focused on the NGO space or the for-profit space or the educational space. It's got a mission it has to fulfill, and you and I as leaders cannot allow odd family members to derail the mission. That's why, Sam, you've heard me say it a number of times in our conversations together. Business is not family. Business is team. Hopefully business is cohesive team. And as you said a minute ago, here in the States, we're very much looking for distinctive people to push that business forward. But their distinctiveness needs to be underneath the umbrella of overall organizational vision and passion and mission and excellence. And I must confess, at times, I am concerned here in the States that we are sacrificing vision at the altar of comfort, if we could say that. That might be a bit of an overstatement.
Can you expand on that a little bit, Andy, for my audience here in the UK, about what you maybe are seeing in that space, maybe what's working well, or how it's maybe impacting or maybe affecting the performance?
Well, we I think both of us have seen the press over the last 18 months or so of the Great Resignation. Here in the States, I'm afraid at times that has created a mindset of I am owed beyond just what I've agreed to be paid. So you and I've had a brief discussion about the tipping culture in the States that is different than in the UK and in the European market. And particularly with the advent of all of the smart scanning devices now, every place you go is building in the option to have a tip. And a tip should be called a gratuity because you're grateful for exceptional service. And yet I saw an article recently where a retail clerk was offended when people weren't tipping them. And in fact, he said in the article, people owe me this because I've come to work. And Sam, that's my concern with how you and I and the people that are paralleling with us. How do we balance the tension of an employee workforce that says I'm owed more than what my contract that I signed said, while still maintaining profitability and mission and future viability? That's a tension that I don't think we've got our hands around in the States completely.
I agree. And I'm really pleased I asked you for that further clarity, because the way in which I would describe it over here is when I'm working with leaders, I'm hearing them describe within their employee groups almost a level of entitlement. And that's what I think I'm hearing in what you're describing there, is that potentially some of these large organizations that I support, they took the decision over lockdown periods to maybe still honor certain percentages of sales bonuses, for example, or kept the packages and benefits in line, even though the organizations were maybe closing the doors or they weren't able to trade in the same way. And therefore profit and revenue wasn't as high as what it would have been without being in the COVID or lockdown periods. But they still honored their commitments or showed goodwill to their employees. And what that has now done is potentially bred this feeling or energy of entitlement of, well, I deserve that, or I am deserving of receiving that, even though potentially performance levels haven't returned to where they should be. And instead, it's more of the mindset. Yeah, I'm going to use that word. I'm going to keep using it if it's okay. The mindset of entitlement. I am owed this, rather than potentially the previous mindset of I will go and earn this, or I will prove my worth. And again, I think that's quite a strong tension for leaders to try and hold now, is because on one level, it is about trying to respect the unique individual, promote them, believe in them, show that there's real value in their skills and expertise. But there needs to also be their commitment to the bigger cause. And so it's that balance of then, I suppose, showing them that they've got a worth, and some of that is going to be financial, but then also them being able to at times recognize that it isn't just what they take home at the end of every month, but it's about what they can do to contribute towards the success or the journey or the growth of the organization or the business or the department that they're a part of.
And you mentioned a minute ago, you've seen this change. So I guess that would be my next question. Yeah. How has this changed in the past season? We're into the new future, into the post 1,000 days of the world being shut down. What are you seeing recently?
So two things, Sandy, what I'm seeing, and particularly in the work with the leaders that I support. One is an anxiety of what this now means or what this is going to become. So almost as people have become embedded in what the situation that the change led to. So they became embedded in what would be described as a new normal over here in the UK. And then what they're now doing is being encouraged to be transitioned away from that. So now they're having to rethink things like childcare, and they're having to rethink things like working patterns and nights away from home, being back out on the road compared to maybe working virtually. Even things like what days are you in the office being expected to report for things like team meetings or team development days compared to now no longer commuting. So there's an anxiety there that I'm sensing within the employees world of, well, what does this now mean? What are my company going to do? Are they going to give us a direction or guidance about things like work from home days, work in the office, sort of quotas, 2 to 3 days a week, for example? Or is that now my choice? And if it's my choice, what do I want to do? And that anxiety I'm seeing really active in a lot of spaces. And I think that's shared then with the leadership group too, because I think a lot of leaders want to sort of grab the reins again and really put some energy back into their workforce, get the best out of their employees, and will have preconceived ideas about how to do that. For example, let's get everybody back into the office. But if the employee group don't want that anymore, they like the idea of only having to commute 2 days a week, then you're starting to see those tensions in reality. And it's bubbling up most definitely in the form of anxiety in one space. And the second would be then the mindset about what is now expected of me. So my entitlement potentially of how I worked for the last 2 to 3 years during these lockdown, shutdown periods, I put in this level or had this expectation placed upon me. So actually, I would quite like that to remain, even though there may now be a shift in the market or an expectation to be out on the road much more or meet the demands. So those are the two things that I would say I'm seeing most frequently in the last change.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I just have a very small perspective here in the States with the organizations that I work with. I'm not sure we would echo the anxiety that you talked about quite as great, but that mindset very powerfully. And I think that contributes to what you mentioned a minute ago of, from a leadership perspective, at times it appears that there's a sense of entitlement that wasn't there, that they're now having to deal with. I also think at times there are some unintended consequences in today's market of decisions that well-intentioned leaders made in a prior season, and now they don't know how to unmake those. So for instance, Sam, I've shared with you at a very personal level, my wife and I rescue dogs. We're big dog rescuers. We've done so since 4 years into our marriage. One of the books I've written is got the picture of my dog on the cover. We're in the dog rescue community. Well, one of the unintended consequences of a leader saying, hey, we're coming back to the office 3 days a week, are those workers who adopted pets in the past 3 years. And all of a sudden, we're seeing a huge influx of, I can't take care of my pet anymore. And one of those unintended consequences of leaders making decisions on behalf of their people. One of the companies I work with several years ago instituted a wellness bonus because of how hard things were. They simply gave their internal management team $150 a month to spend on themselves, on massages, on therapy, on gym memberships. In fact, after the first couple of months, I think they didn't even ask to see proof of payment. They simply wanted this to be, we want you to spend $1,800 US a year taking care of yourself because we know it's hard out there. And then they came to annual renewal cycle. And what you were talking about, that mindset has become a sense of entitlement. And we ended up having a pretty long couple of phone calls about, how do I take that $150 away now without offending? And in fact, ultimately, this small company decided to not call it a wellness incentive anymore, but to simply elevate every one of their managers and give them an automatic $1,800 US raise, not for performance, but simply because we hadn't thought about coming out of this when we entered into it a couple of years ago. Are you seeing anything like that as well?
Absolutely. And it's going from what was to what now is. So it's those old mindsets or those old decisions that may have been extremely important and incredibly invaluable for the organization, for the employees at that time. But now it's that readjustment phase. And I know we're talking about the tensions. I know we need to close this episode in just a few minutes. But if I was to give a parting gift of advice or guidance to a leader listening to this today, it would be to be kind to yourself in that space of recognizing some of the transitions and changes that we've gone through over this most recent period of time, but also to go in with a fresh perspective about what now is going to serve you and your people and the business for its ultimate survival and progression and growth moving forward. And that might mean, as you've just identified, that there needs to be some strong communication or some changes of messaging, some changes around incentives or benefits or packages. But ultimately, my key guidance or tip would be to do it with clear and open communication, rather than what I have seen, which is in some organizations over here, whereby senior leaders have made decisions and just made a blanket announcement to their people, which has really derailed their employees. And so whilst I'm not necessarily saying it's about giving the choice or the complete decision to the employees, what I am encouraging leaders to think about is the communication style with how they relate that back to their people.
Well, that sounds like a great place for us to start this, or to call time out to this episode. You've opened the whole door to change management and how leaders manage that. So we probably need to talk about that in a subsequent conversation.
Absolutely. Andy, thank you for your time today. I hope that the audience enjoyed listening to it. We'll close that there and we'll start our next session shortly. Thanks, Andy.
All right. Thanks, Sam.